Welcome to the Wise and Happy Life podcast, where ancient wisdom meets modern science, and mindfulness, philosophy, and happiness practices blend with neuroscience, compassion, and common sense. Hosted by Bob Martin, meditation mentor, happiness coach, trial lawyer, and entrepreneur. This podcast explores how to live with grace, presence, and purpose in a complex world.
Hey, everybody. Good morning. At least it's morning in North Carolina. I hope it's someplace wonderful for you. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of A Wise and Happy Life. And I'm really excited to have Ray Martin with us today. Ray is he is an alumni of the corporate world, and led him to taking a break and writing a book, and taking a deep insight and flow and dive into what it takes to be a human being. So, Ray, without further ado, let me say hi to the folks and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I think you summed it up really nicely. And by the way, thank you for inviting me onto your podcast. I'm really delighted to be here. The story I will talk to you about is one that I never would have imagined when I was younger. I think I followed what someone described to me as an off-the-shelf life story version of life, which was the one I was taught when I was a kid. To be happy in life, you've got to get married, have a good job, have a house, have kids, and all that sort of stuff. So I unquestionably just followed that guidance. Didn't really consider if there was an alternative. It never even occurred to me until the business partner that I had, who was the woman I was married to, who helped me achieve some of the successes with the company, came home from a business meeting one day and suddenly announced, "I'm leaving you and I'm leaving the company."
Oh.
And this was in 2003 this happened. And we'd been together for 10 years, and I'd been business leader of the year in England, so I'd had notable success in that journey. But in a way, it wasn't surprising, because I also had this feeling the whole time I was doing that I was living the life that others expected of me, as Bronnie Ware says in her book, and wasn't living life true to myself. And so at some point I thought, this has got to change, because I'm not really, although I was quite competent, I wasn't really that great at it. Was competent, really good at it, but I wasn't really enjoying it. That's what I meant to say.
Well, let me just take you back a second. I think that we had an opportunity to chat a little bit, and you told me that the business, of course, that you started up with your wife was one of looking into human leadership.
Yes.
And what it takes to be a good and effective and efficient leader in this crazy world that we live in.
That's right.
But you let me know that was an interest that you had even as a child.
Indeed,
I always find it interesting how so many times our childhood wants, our childhood dreams, sometimes they develop and they come true. But tell us about that childhood and that dream, and what it was about being human that attracted you so much.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was really remember as a young kid watching sports people, in the Olympics and stuff like that. There was very little of live sport on the TV when I was growing up, so when you saw it, it really had an impact. And I was thinking, how come some people just beat other people by fractions of a second, or what? There's such small margins, And so I became quite fascinated in how those people mentally prepared for what they did, to get these advantages, because clearly they were all athletically very similar, but some had a different way of thinking or different belief system or something like that. So I read whatever I could, but it was before really coaching was a main part of the mainstream business world. It was really, I identified really with sport. And then when I went in to start my own career in the mid-70s, and I was working in sales, there was a lot of people sort of doing courses on how do you persuade customers to buy more, and how do you get better results in sales. And most of that was all around the thinking that you had in your head, and the way you communicated and related, and then paid the attention to detail you paid to how a person was responding to you and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And so I just became totally absorbed and fascinated with it. But mostly the reason was because I wanted to be a high performer. I wasn't really thinking in the early stages about helping others. That came later.
What you're saying reminds me of the story of the 4-minute mile.
Yeah.
And it was Roger.
Roger Bannister.
Roger
Yeah.
Bannister, and how all of the scientists and all of the science and all of the sports knowledge of the day said that it was impossible for a
Yeah.
human being to run a mile in under 4 minutes.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
as a result of that mental barrier, nobody could break it. And I always think you mentioned the small little differences, and it always makes me think of how incredibly powerful your belief system is if it has the capacity to control the speed that you run at to allow you to come close to this 4 minute mile limit, but believing that it can't be broken and that in
Yes.
effect death would be the result of breaking it.
Correct.
It is timing your run so that you almost make it but don't make it. And when he broke it, once he broke it and proved that you can do this within the next year, dozens of people were able to break it. And it really comes down to what you're speaking about, I think. Maybe you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but
Well,
it comes
yeah,
down to the belief system, right?
it is a belief system, and we have a similar episode of it recently with Eliud Kipchoge, who demonstrated that a man could run a marathon in under 2 hours. It wasn't
Uh-huh.
officially accepted as a record because he ran it outside of the normal race conditions. He had some very particular assistance to do it, but he's the first and only person to have run under 2 hours, and that's helping to shift the agreement, as I call it, shift
Hmm.
the belief that someone can do it because he's proven you can.
Hmm.
And so
Yeah,
it won't be
that's a
long before we
wonderful
saw it.
that's a wonderful world for you to be working in.
Oh, it is. It is. Yeah, and it was necessary because my career started at the beginning of what was known back then as the call center industry. Because in the 80s, a lot of retail businesses switched from the high street and from stores into the call center, or at least they had a mixture of both. And the call center was very quickly established a reputation for being a horrible place to work because there were hundreds of people in little cubicles making phone calls all day long,
Hmm.
very demotivated, a high turnover of jobs, really poor management, no motivation, no sense of belonging, no sense of purpose. So the burnout rate was massive. The churn rate, they called it. It's a horrible word called churn. And that was how I grew up. And so, as a consultant, to make those operations work better, there were lots of ways you could improve. And a lot of them were to do with the software you ran on the computers and the way calls were fed into the system, etc. But one big aspect was the leadership and the motivation and the engagement of staff. And that was the part that really fascinated me for some reason. My colleagues were
Hmm.
much more interested in some of the harder infrastructure stuff. But I loved the people part of it. I couldn't get enough of it. I was always wondering how do you get a group of people to do an ordinary job but in an extraordinary way that they feel like
Hmm.
they're doing something amazing.
Hmm.
And I think that's where it started for me because we could see that if we could crack that nut, we could show these companies how to save 100 people from leaving that year. And
Hmm.
and that would mean each person to replace them cost about $2,000 or $3,000, in recruitment. So that was like a couple of $1 million. It was a massive amounts of money that they would be saving.
And I love the phrase that you just used, how to move from the ordinary way of doing things into
Yeah,
extraordinary ways of doing
yeah,
things. And
yeah,
I think that's something that so much of us yearn for. We have
yeah,
a feeling that our lives are ordinary, but that the potential of what's possible for us is extraordinary. And how do we make that move? So you made that move. How
yeah.
did
And
you
I
do?
was
How did you do that?
well, I think it's. Well, some people say to me, "You were very courageous to give up everything that you'd earned and created and let go of it." But I thought to myself, when those events happened, because my wife said, "I'm leaving you," quite suddenly. At the same time, my father got very ill and he died. And so within 2 or 3 months, like my life as I knew it had imploded. I was out of the house and my home. I was out of the marriage. The company was going to change, and my dad had gone. And I felt broken, Bob. To be honest, I just felt really broken, so broken. I thought I'll never be happy again. I couldn't even get up. For a year. It was like pretty low, and my close friends rallied around and gave me a lot of support. And one of them even suggested, why don't you just take a 6-month sabbatical? To which I laughed and said, that's ridiculous. I'm not wasting my time doing that. And sort of carried on. Yeah, yeah, right, exactly. Because I'd never taken a break since I was 16 and went straight into work. Because another thing I probably didn't tell you was that when I was at school, like 10, 11 years old, I thought it was ridiculous, the whole concept of retirement. Because I was in the 60s era, and in Britain at that time, the life expectancy was lower than it is now.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of my parents' friends, they would retire, and then literally within 2 or 3 years, they'd be dead.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, that guy worked his arse off for his whole life, then had 2 or 3 years where he could do everything he'd spoken about in his working life, his dreams, and then he was gone, or she was gone. It's the same, it didn't matter. And I thought, that's crazy. Why would anyone just work their whole life, just have a couple of years at the end and go? I thought, I'm not going to do that. My friends at school thought I was silly. They didn't know what I was talking about at 11. They said, what are you going to do then, Ray? I said, well, whatever I do, I'm going to just work twice as hard or have 2 jobs until I'm about halfway through my life, say 40 or 45. And I'll just earn twice as much money in that first half. So then the second half, I don't have to work, and I've got enough money to pay for the second half.
Right.
And everyone just sort of thought I was some kind of foolish idiot saying these things. And also, I had no idea what that meant or what I'd have to do. When you're 11, you don't really understand the world of work. But that was the vision that I had. And here I was at 43 with my business partner saying, I'm leaving you and leaving the company. And we'd amassed quite a good amount of money between us through the company. And I was thinking, oh my God, I'd totally and utterly forgotten what I said when I was 11. I mean, literally I'd forgotten. And here I was, probably not exactly there how I'd imagined, but not very similar. And I thought, the power of setting an intention, even when you're a young kid, and having a vision like that, even if you forget it, it's still working. Because once you put the energy out into the universe about what your vision is, the universe is reconfiguring all of the time to give you that. And it was a massive realization that here I was about to consider taking sabbatical, but it really wasn't until there was a step in between me actually leaving the life I was in and going on the sabbatical. I needed something to tip me over the edge, and that came when in 2004 or no 2005 that came. I went to Australia to look after a friend, and something happened. To look after a friend who was sick.
Uh-huh.
Because as I was saying earlier, I was so broken and so depressed and so down that one good friend in England said to me, do you know what? If you can't see a way out of that funk, if you really can't see a way out and this looks bleak, one thing you can do is you just put your own troubles aside completely for a bit and go and find someone else who really needs help and help them 100% and just put your whole energy into serving someone else for a while. And I thought,
there's something. There is something very, very special about being of service. I mean, even if you look at all of the great wisdom teachers through time, if you look at the Buddha, if you look at the Christ, if you look at the Pope, all the great wisdom leaders, they all washed the feet of their disciples. They were of service, and I think if you're of service anywhere, it teaches you how to be of service anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. And
of course, the other end of it, sometimes people can become overwhelmed by their feeling of a need to be of service, and the like, and burn out. But as long as you keep it in balance, it's a great thing. So you found here at this age, life was falling apart for you, and then there was somebody that needed your help on the other side of the world, literally, right?
Yeah, well, because I thought this sounded like a really hopeful suggestion to me. Because I thought, well, I just happened to know that a friend of mine had breast cancer in Australia, and she was married with a young child, and she was going to start chemo. So I reached out to her and said, how do you feel if I just came over for a month and looked after you and Pete and the family, She said, oh, that would just be so brilliant. I would love that. And so I went, okay, I'm coming. So I went to Australia, which is a long, long way away from England. And because as I made such a long trip, I had another friend who lived in another part of Australia. So once I'd finished up with Elizabeth, her name is, and I wrote about Elizabeth in the book that came out later, I went up to Cairns to see my other friend Julie. And when I got there, she said, "We're going to see a play, me and my mum, this week at the theatre. Do you want to come?" I said, "Okay." So we go to the theatre watching this play, and in the programme where it's got notes about the actors, I see that there's a notice saying we're auditioning for the next play. It's called Out of Order. It's a British play, and it's about an English member of Parliament. And so I just turned to my friends as a joke and said, "Oh, I should be in that play. I've got a British accent, a proper one. You know,
A proper one.
none of this. Good day, mate. I'm a member of Parliament, mate. You know, like the Australians say." And I thought they would just laugh and chuckle, but they didn't. They looked at me quite seriously and said, "Well, we actually know the director of the play. You know, why don't you go to the audition?" I said, "Come on, that's ridiculous." I said, "Going home to England in 3 days, and you know, I need to do work and pay my bills and stuff. I'm not an actor. I've got no training. There'll be lots of real actors who know much better than me." And they sort of said, "Okay, fair enough. Well, why don't you just go for fun? You know, just to enjoy the audition, not to try and get a part." So I did. I thought that's a really good idea. I'll go for fun. Flew back to England, and then 2 days after I got back, the director of the play called and said, "We really want you to be in the play, in the lead role of the play."
Oh
Right?
my. Oh
Like
my.
400 lines of dialogue in the script for this
Oh.
character. He has to move dead bodies. He has to kiss two women on stage. He's a comedic foil for the serious character.
Uh-huh.
And I thought, oh my God, I cannot believe this, Bob. I just can't believe this is so outside of my thinking. I thought maybe this is the thing that the universe is sending me to get me out of my funk. You know, maybe this is it. And I called my sister-in-law, who's an actress professionally, and I said, "Do you think I could get away with this? Do you think I could do this somehow? Could I blag my way through?" She said, "Yeah, I think you probably could. I can help you with that." So I called the director back and said, "Look, I love the fact you've asked me." And I said, "Are you sure you're not crazy that you're having me in it?" They said, "No, we think you'd be perfect. We can help you get ready. We know you've got no experience. We'll help you." I said, "Well, there's one more thing I need to do." And that was that I had 3 or 4 clients I'd promised I would do coaching and consulting work with. And I've got this thing about integrity in life. If you tell someone you're going to do something, I always keep my promises. My dad had me learn that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to ring each one and have a sort of quite a weird and uncomfortable conversation. And I rang each one and decided, I'd be honest. I said, "I've just been to Australia. I'm separated from my wife. I'm having a hard time. I've been to Australia, been to this audition, and I've been offered this chance of a lifetime." And I said, "I really feel like something, like almost like God wants me to do it. And I feel like I'd like to say yes, but I've given you my word. I'll work with you. So I'm only going to go if you give me your full blessing to postpone the work. And if you give me your blessing, I will go. And if you don't, I'll stay here." And all 4 of them said I would go.
Go.
And that gave me what I've called in my book a confirmation signal, because I'm a big believer in getting confirmation signals when you're facing a decision that's a huge decision potentially in its impact. And there's a bit of you that's going, shall I, shan't I? Is this right for me or not? Am I not? How do I be sure? And I've used that confirmation signal a lot in my life since that moment. I learnt about it in flying.
You know, I'd like to stop and stay with that for
Yeah.
a little bit, because you know there's a part of us that talks about help coming from the universe in a kind of wistful way and hoping that it's true, and
Yeah.
then there's another part of us that says, well, it's all kind of woo woo and law of attraction stuff, and it's just, you know, a fad and the like. But I always think of this quote by Sir William Hillary, which, you know, always, it took me as a young child. I read it, and I've held on to it ever since. And it talks about commitment. And
Yeah.
in the quote, he says, once one, you know, until one is committed, there's always a chance to step back. There's
All
always
right.
vacillating results and the like.
Yeah.
But when one commits, it's as if the universe, you know, configures itself,
It
and
does.
all, and he says all manner of help which you would not have otherwise expected
Correct.
comes to you. And then he
Correct.
quotes a couplet by Goethe where he says, whatever you can dream of, begin it, because there is magic
Yeah.
in it and beginning it. And so, there are those of us who, like you, will take that risky first step and step out of our lives and take on something else. And then in other areas of our own lives, and other people, they don't have that tolerance for risk. And how do we help folks to be able to build up the strength, the courage? I don't know what you would call it, what the word that you'd put on it is, but that ability to take that first tentative step. How do
Yeah.
you
Well,
have
that's
the courage
hard.
to do that?
To,
It's hard.
it's
No,
hard to answer. It's
it's
hard to
hard.
answer, but and there's a
It's
whole
hard to ask.
industry of
It's hard
self-help
to ask.
books. Yeah,
Right, right, right,
there's thousands of people who would claim to have an answer for that. I'll tell
right.
you how it seems to
But
me.
what's your answer?
I'll be really honest.
Uh-huh.
I think you've got to have a vision for your life of some kind that sees you at your greatest or your best potential. Somehow. Without that, I think it is virtually impossible.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Because you're not raising your eyesight up. You're just in the soup you're in, and then
Uh-huh.
you're just trying to sort of get comfortable the whole time, and that's not really going to help. So for me, I knew somehow I had enough awareness, at least, to say that when all of those tragic events happened and my marriage came to an end and my dad passed away, I knew energetically that that path was no longer open. I knew that that was the end of that line of work, because
Mm-hmm,
friends of
mm-hmm.
mine they said to me, for example, why don't you just get a new business partner and replace the one you have and carry on, because you've built this brand, you've built this company, you've got clients,
Right,
you
right.
can carry on doing it. And every time they said that to me, I could feel the
Yeah.
contraction in my body. It was like, God, no way could I do that. I couldn't. Like, if we're at $20 million, I still couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew that I just had to acknowledge reality and say I knew that was over. And it was scary because it meant whatever was going to replace that for the rest of my life, I didn't know what that was. And so you have
Mm-hmm.
to. So one thing you have to be willing to do is to step into the unknown and not know.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to not know, as long as
Yeah,
you.
and it's okay, and it's scary. There's a kind of intelligence, I think, that's working and worked, within you.
Yeah,
Some people might call it our intuitive intelligence. It's
yeah,
not really rational. You really can't put it into words.
that's right.
It comes up more like a feeling, like the
Yep,
contraction you're talking about, or that feeling of expansion. And
yep,
I think that in today's, workaday world, there's so many of us rely almost exclusively on thoughts that we can put into words, and we
yeah,
don't listen to the hunches, the feelings. But you did,
yeah. I
right?
did, and honestly, people said to me after many years later, they said, "God, you were very courageous to leave all that behind and go on this unknown expedition."
Hmm.
I said, "No, I don't think so." I said it would have taken more courage to have stayed in the
Right,
life I was
right,
in.
right, exactly.
It actually felt the opposite to me. I felt like I
Yeah,
was
yeah,
taking
no,
the. I actually had quite a lot of guilt and shame about opting out of the revenue
hmm,
tax
hmm,
paying
hmm.
system. Leaving the mainstream life gave me quite a lot of guilt. So I thought,
Yeah, I
I-
get it. I get it. It would have been harder not to.
yeah,
Let me
exactly.
tell you a little story, if I may.
Yeah, please.
Um, so I am in the Miami courthouse one day, because I was a lawyer for 40 years, and my secretary was with me, and she was a short little human being.
Okay.
Uh, and this particular day, there was some trouble in her life. So we came out. She met me outside of one of the courtrooms, and we walked down the hall, and we were coming down the escalator, and her eyes were cast down, and and I was just giving her her space.
Yep.
And as we stepped off the escalator, it was almost as if the sun had been shut out, because there was this giant of a man that stepped in our way.
Wow.
This huge man. I mean, he was just huge. And my secretary looked up at him, and he said to her, he said, "Sweetheart, don't you ever walk with your eyes down, because you can be proud of yourself."
Right.
And
Beautiful.
she lifted her eyes up, and the rest of the day was totally changed.
Oh,
But I'm
wow.
just thinking about that because you used the metaphor.
Mm.
We have to lift our eyes up,
Yeah. Yeah, we
and
do. We
and
do.
and it is it's a physical act, but it's also a metaphorical act. We have to, so often we walk with our eyes cast down, being
Yeah.
comfortable in what we know, and sometimes we just have to lift our eyes up and look out at the horizon. Yes.
Yeah. And I love it. And I love the metaphor of the caterpillar turning into a butterfly, because
Mm-hmm.
a
Mm-hmm.
complete and utter transformation takes place when the caterpillar winds its cocoon around itself and then incubates for several weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And what's really great about that metaphor is that from the outside, you don't see anything happening particularly. It looks
Right.
pretty dull as a spectator thing. There's nothing
But
happening. It's
you
just,
you did that. You
yes, but
did
there's
that.
just this, but within that cocoon, there's massive changes going on.
Right.
And
Right.
then just before the butterfly emerges, it
Mm-hmm.
needs to start pushing its very fragile wings against the cocoon and to break it, and it struggles. And that
Mm-hmm.
struggle that the butterfly goes through is a necessary part of it developing the strength in its wings that it needs
Uh-huh.
to then be able to fly. If it doesn't have the struggle, it can't actually fly.
Right.
And so, this is just a certain nature's perfect design, and we're the same. I think human beings grow through adversity, through difficult events, through challenges, through things that are tough, and we learn about resilience and how to cope with those things, and it makes us better, for life.
Right. And I understand that your sabbatical of a few months turned
Yeah,
out to be a little bit longer than a
yeah.
few months.
So
Tell us about that.
after I did the play, I was flying back to England to resume
Mm-hmm.
my Ray as a businessman life, and I was feeling loads of dread. And I thought, why am I feeling so much dread? I thought, because I don't want to be Ray the businessman. And then it suddenly dawned on me. I went, oh my God, that's the insight I asked the universe for. Ray the businessman is a character like George Pigden. I'd never
Uh-huh.
thought of myself like that before.
Uh-huh.
I knew
Uh-huh.
I'd spent 4 months learning how to be George Pigden, how he walked, what he wore, how he spoke, kind of food he ate, the friends he had. I became his character.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, Ray's just the same. I've just done the character over a longer period. I've done it unconsciously, and I haven't really consciously authored the character. But I am not Ray the businessman. He's just a character that I play. And
Mm-hmm.
because I'm the script writer and the director and the actor, I can write him out of the story. I can end the series. I can kill that guy off. I can.
Uh-huh.
And I never had this way of thinking until I finished the play.
Mm-hmm.
And so what that did was it reminded me of the person who said, why don't you take a sabbatical? Now suddenly I went, I'm going to kill that guy off and I'm going to take that sabbatical, because I want to be Ray the explorer, Ray the traveler, Ray the adventurer.
Mm-hmm.
And I also was on a quest to answer the question that Bronnie Ware asked in her book, The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. She says, what is the life that's true for you rather than the one that's expected by others of you?
Right. Right.
And I knew I wanted to discover that. So I was on a quest to find out what that looked like, felt like, sounded like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I thought,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to go away for 6 months to Asia, where there's all this mysticism and Eastern philosophy. I'm going to go to Asia and I'm going to find out how to answer those questions. But when I got to Asia, I was still in a load of guilt and shame and anxiety about my old life. So I never really, after 6 months, got anywhere. But one thing that happened in the last few weeks of that 6 months was I went into a monastery, a Buddhist monastery, and
Mm-hmm.
did something called a Vipassana meditation retreat. 10 days of silence with monks,
Mm-hmm.
sitting, meditating all day and walking,
Mm-hmm.
sitting. And that completely and utterly changed my mindset doing that. It kind of brought me a level of peace and clarity that I'd almost never experienced in my life before. And an understanding of the Buddhist teaching and how suffering in the human life is a part of a cycle of craving that humans have. We're unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
We've got this big hole inside ourselves. We look to the outside for something that will fill the hole, whether it's a new relationship or a new car or a new job or something we can buy. And of course, we go and get those things, and it brings relief for a very short period, and then it wears off, and then we start grasping and clinging again, and that's called the cycle of craving. And I didn't
Mm-hmm.
understand until they taught me this. I didn't understand any of this. But once I realised that, I went, oh my God, I've been doing this my whole life. Even all my pursuit as a businessman was partly to do with that cycle. Like, I thought, I don't need to do this anymore. I don't need to be craving. If I just am honest with myself about what I truly want, I can just focus on those things. I don't need to crave things to be happy. I can just be happy as I am. And all of this thing was changing me, but I still had lots of questions I didn't answer. So I carried on with the sabbatical. I ran into a year now. And then after a year, I started to see things that touched my heart. And I started a fundraising effort to raise money for an elephant sanctuary in Thailand and an orphanage in Nepal. And I decided I was going to run the New York Marathon in 2009 to raise money. And I'd never run in my life before. I decided that because I met a traveler who was a 6 times marathon runner. And when he described it to me, my body was tingling with excitement. And I said, oh, do you think I could run a marathon? I was 49 when I asked him this. He said, have you run before? I said, no. He said, well, I'll tell you what, I know why you want to do it. If you stay here for 6 months where I live, I'll train you how to run a marathon. I went, okay, that's a deal. So I started training and I got on the phone to all my business contacts and managed to raise $15,000 by running the New York Marathon, which I did. And I was hooked. I loved the training process. I loved the run. I went on to do 5 marathons in my 50s and I raised about $50,000 in total for this foundation.
Oh, wow.
And so this became a new part of my life. And I was still in Asia doing all this. And so this covered the first 5 years. This took me up to 2010 to spend all the money and dispense it to all these places. And then I thought, oh, I don't want to go back now. It's 5 years has passed. I like this life. I don't want to go back to England.
So tell me, there is a difference. When I understand the cycle of craving, there is a difference in what's left over when you satisfy the expectation. In other words,
Yes.
I want this beautiful little trinket, and I feel I decide that I can't afford it, but I leave it, and the desire is still there, and it grows in me, and it grows in me until I go back. I might buy it again, and then I put it on the shelf, and a couple of days later, that's over and done with. But yet the training that you did is tough. It's hard, but yet you came to love it, and the money that you raised is different than the trinket that you buy, isn't it? There's
Yeah, because
something.
it's an act
There's
of
something
service.
qualitatively.
It's an act of service for someone
Significant,
else. It's about
and
empowering others.
it doesn't leave you in that cycle of craving. I mean,
No,
when you do it, you don't feel like you have to do more to satisfy your craving. There's
that's right.
something that's solid and eternal, and that is becomes actually a part of you, and
Yeah,
part that, and the character that you were talking about
yeah,
recreating and authoring, it begins to you try it on, and it begins to fit more and more
yeah,
until it just becomes secondary. It becomes who you are.
yeah. Exactly. But the me that was doing the fundraising, this was
Hmm.
the version of Ray that was completely aligned with my true values,
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
doing the things that I genuinely believe in, doing
Right.
something that sort of fitted with my sense of freedom, integrity, love is a value I hold very dearly.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
this was me being able to express that love in action for others. And I was in the book Life Without a Tie, I was asked to write what would be my 6 rules for happiness.
So
And
tell us about that.
I was going to say, so the 6th rule,
Hmm.
uh, and it only works if you're doing all the other 5, which I can come back
Right,
to in a
right.
moment. But the 6th rule was really, if you want to be deeply, deeply fulfilled in life, you have to find a way of living true to yourself and then empowering others to do the same. And so,
Hmm.
what the marathon fundraising represents for me was a way of empowering these people that were running the elephant sanctuary, or empowering these orphans who wanted to get a good education and get a good job, and had no one representing them or championing them. So I took that on, and it was always the drive was to empower others, and that's what made it so fulfilling and so brilliant to do. And
Hmm.
no, it wasn't really there was no reward for my ego in it particularly. I mean, you get a bit of kudos. Oh, he's a really nice guy. He's a fundraiser. You get a little bit of recognition, but it's not really why you're doing it. because it's
Although
tough to do.
sometimes I feel that being of service to others is really one of the most selfish things that you can do, because
Kind of.
the reward that we get when we are of service to others is just so abiding. It's so
Yeah.
encompassing. It is literally like being folded up in a warm, fuzzy blanket
Yeah.
for
True.
me,
But
and it stays and it abides with you, and so it, in a way, it's kind of like the most selfish thing that you can do.
it's true. But it wasn't. It was the hardest thing I've done in many ways. Much harder than running a business because one, the training for marathons is very demanding.
Mm,
And I was a man in my 50s and I was having to stick to that discipline all the time. So it wasn't easy. But in between all of that, I was having to be making phone calls to ask people to donate money. And you know how much people hate being asked to
yeah,
donate
right,
money.
right,
It's a
right,
bloody
right.
tough ask. I
Uh-huh.
got 300 donors to the first campaign. And that's a huge amount for someone who's a backpacker to do.
Well,
And so,
not only did you go through that training, and so many pieces of your life, were things that took a great deal of preparation. Which reminds me of a funny thing that I heard the Dalai Lama mention once. He talked about change,
yes.
and someone asked him, how difficult is change, and his answer was, "Oh, change is very easy. It happens in just a moment. It doesn't
Yeah.
take any effort. It just occurs. One moment you're this, and the next moment you're that." But he said, preparation for change can take years.
That's true. What a great thing. Yeah. How brilliant.
So can I want to tell you a little story about this idea of wearing a different hat, or the
Yeah.
character.
Yeah.
So I'm out to dinner with my wife once, and she orders a fisherman's platter.
Okay.
That's a
Oh,
very
yeah. Yeah.
variety.
Yeah.
And along with everything else on the plate came a lobster tail. And so
Okay.
they came out and they put the plate down, and it didn't have a lobster tail on it. It had crab legs.
Oh,
And she said to me, "Oh, but I really want the lobster tail." And I'm out to eat. I don't want to be conflictual. I don't want to make them. I said, "Oh, the crab legs, they're fine. You dip them in butter, it tastes the same. Don't worry about it." There's no. I really wanted the lobster tail, and
right.
I'm trying to get her to accept the crab legs because I didn't want to confront the waiters and
Right.
etc. And so finally, she says to me, "Put on your lawyer's hat." Now, the moment she said that to me, I had all of the, strength
Yeah.
and compunction to stand. Excuse me, my wife, and I could advocate for her
Yeah.
because I had moved into that version of me, which I
That's a
had
great.
already defined,
Yeah.
and we have these different versions of us. And then you always hear this statement. I'd ask you to comment on it: "Fake it till you make it." Now, I believe in that.
Yeah.
I think that truly works. What do you think?
Oh, totally. I mean, those are the different characters in your repertoire, those different roles that you play. They're all
Uh-huh.
parts you've acted. So you know that
Right.
quite well. And I remember coaching someone a couple of years back. She was a manager in a manufacturing company and trying to become the best leader she could be in that role. But she'd also told me in one or two conversations how much she loved going to Glastonbury Music Festival, which is an annual event in England. It's world famous. It's
Mhm,
televised all around
mhm.
the world. And when she spoke about herself at Glastonbury and how she organised the group that she was with and did everything, she was like a different, totally and utterly different person. Very creative, very out of the box thinking and everything. I remember being stuck with her in a session once and said, "How would your Glastonbury attendee deal with this work situation if you handed it over to them?" And she said, "Oh, they'd go like this. They'd come up with this idea. They do this. They do this. They would. This is what they do." I said, "Great. Well, that's the resource you've got access to all of the time." And she never thought of transferring parts of that life to her work life, and seeing it's all interchangeable and usable.
Yeah. So, you give me a thought comes up in my mind based on what we're talking about. And it's kind of like you wear all these different hats and you play these different roles. And I think the path perhaps to finding your authentic self is within those roles. There are bits and parts and pieces which actually map on and feel comfortable to you.
Yeah,
It's like this shirt fits me, but
yeah,
those pants don't. and these shoes do fit me. And eventually you kind of create your avatar of what works for you and what fits for you. And it might be a little bit from this role and a little bit from that
Yeah,
role and a little bit here. But when it all comes together, it does map on and it fits there. And all of a sudden, because I teach meditation and people always talk about, finding peace and serenity and the like. And um, uh, it's not something that just happens. You know this because you were doing Vipassana,
mm,
but it's not something that just comes from you from chanting or just sitting. It
no,
comes to you, from a long range of picking and choosing and trying and experimenting and contemplating and
I,
thinking
I
and
agree.
strengthening your mind.
Yeah, there's a great book out, just came out a year ago, called Tiny Experiments. It talks about this. You've got to try things out, I think, and that's
Right.
and that's why I feel like at this. I've had a lot of years now being alive, as you have. So
Uh-huh.
you and me, we've tried lots of different things. So we do have a
Right.
good
Right.
understanding of what we.
And discarded a
Yeah,
bunch. Right.
exactly. So that's part of the experiment. You go, I'll
Mhm.
try that, and you do it. You go, do you know what? I wouldn't want to do that again. As much as it was okay, I'm done with
Uh-huh,
that.
uh-huh.
I'm finished. But yeah,
So tell us a little bit about your book. We're looking at the clock, and so
okay.
I want to spend a little time on your book. Tell us about your book. Tell us about that's another path that you went on besides training for a marathon,
Yeah,
besides sitting for 10 days in silence and taking up meditation and all of these other great
sure.
paths, which required your thought, your heart, especially
Yeah,
your love for others,
yep,
and then you sat down and did this task, which I think every one of us has a book within us,
yeah.
but not every one of us sits down and writes it.
Well,
So
you
you
hit the
did.
nail on the head. Yeah, you did, and I'll tell you how that happened because
Yeah,
that was an act
please.
of service too. Because
Hmm.
I left in 2005 to go on the 6 month sabbatical. By the time I got to 2010 and I'd done the marathons and everything, I was 5 years into the journey. And
Hmm.
of course, in that 5 year period, I met lots of travelers and we had beers together and coffees together. And every time people would say, well, so tell me, how did you start this? And I'd tell them some of the stories I've shared with you. And at the end of those conversations, a few of them, at least a few of them, would always say, do you know what? I'd really like to give you my email address, Ray. And I say, why? They say, because if you ever write a book about this journey at some point in the future, when it finishes, I'd like to read it. And I just laughed and I said, you are kidding me. I'm not a writer. I mean, I had been experimenting with writing a travel blog because blogging was
Hmm.
quite big in 2005 because it was pre Facebook and Instagram. None of those things existed. So
Hmm.
blogging was the thing that people really wanted, to read. And so I've been writing a travel blog and people really seem to like it. I got lots of followers on that. But I hadn't really been a writer. So by 2010, when I'd finished my first phase of the marathon fundraising, I thought I had about 100 email addresses that people had given me. And I thought,
Uh-huh.
oh my God, I get the universe wants me to write a book. I never really got this before, but it just suddenly dawned on me. And so I started to think, I have no idea how to write a book. I don't even know what's involved. What would I be committing to? And as I was having those thoughts, I heard about this 5 day writers workshop that was going on in Chiang Mai. And a woman was coming over from New York, a big literary agent. She'd published a book about Microsoft and it'd been a bestseller. So she came over and I was selling this course to writers. So I wrote to her and I said, 2 questions. I'm a beginner. I know nothing at all. Do you have to have some experience already to do your workshop? Because it looked like that you did. And would I be in the way if I signed up for it? And the second thing is, it's $1,200, which I can't afford. I'm a fundraiser. I've got no money. But I could scrape together $500 if you'd let me do it for 500. And I thought, I'll wait to hear what she says, because if she says yes to both, that's a confirmation signal. It's the right thing.
Uh-huh. There's that confirmation signal again. Yeah.
She wrote back and said, yes, and yes, and you can do it.
Uh-huh.
I went,
Oh,
oh my
wonderful.
God, that's my confirmation signal. So I did that 5 day course. And out as a result of all of that 5 days, I suddenly realized I want to write a memoir, not a fiction or a novel or anything like this. I want to write a memoir about my actual journey. And that's how it landed with me. So I now had the idea of Life Without a Tie, which was about the journey I was in, which was still going on. So I didn't actually start writing proper until about 3 years after that workshop. But at least I knew I was going to write a book and I had made the commitment. And then I just needed to let time pass, etc. And I got on with it. But that's how the book came about. And I finished my travels in 2019. I'd been living in Warsaw in Poland for 3 years at the end because I met someone who lived there and I went into a relationship with her and we were living together. But when that relationship came to an end, I used my inner wisdom and guidance to go, I'm 14 years on the road now. What do I do? And the guidance kept saying to me, Ray, all you need to do right now is go back to England and finish writing the book. The rest will drop into place afterwards. But just go back to England and make sure you get the story written and get it into the world and finish. So that's what I did. So 2019, I went back to England and the book was published in 2023, I think.
And tell us, what will we get out of the book?
Well, what you'll get is, in terms of what you can use practically, you get the 6 rules for happiness and what they are and how you apply them to yourself or your version of those. I also had to author 10 guiding principles when the journey started because although I was logistically prepared to live out of a backpack, psychologically I was all over the place. And so before I did the Vipassana retreat, I authored these 10 guiding principles that I would use to guide myself, like self-acceptance, non-attachment, modesty, contribution, which led me to start writing a blog. And I had these principles figured out and I thought, I'm going to live by these principles for a while.
Are you still writing the blog?
No, I stopped doing that up now. In 2012, I stopped. That came to an end. And so I had now my safety guide rails with these 10 principles. But mostly you'll get an account of a lot of things that I did that really helped me grow and some of the big mistakes and screw-ups I made in that journey. And
well, let me ask you the question that you asked the lady from New York.
Yes.
Is this a good book for a beginner?
Oh, definitely.
Or will they get in the way?
No. It's really a really raw account, personal account of everything that happened and what I learned in terms of wisdom and lots of practical tools. And I wrote the book in a way where at the end of each chapter, there's some self-reflection questions so that whoever's reading it can actually walk through the journey with me. And so if I was in a moment where I'm having to make a decision, I might say, what would you do if you were in this moment? How would you make that decision? How would it apply to you? Is there a situation you're in your life right now where this is happening?
Right.
So it's
actually, where can we go to find out more about you? Of course, I'm sure you're on Amazon.
Yeah, I'm on Amazon.
Let me just sink and tie down this name, Life Without a Tie.
Yes,
I'm going to tie it down by telling you this: that there came a time in my lawyer career where I decided I was going to retire from the courts, and so I picked up all my ties and I put them in a plastic bag. And I gave it to my suite mate, and we shared a suite. I walked in and I put this bag of ties down, said, I won't be needing these anymore.
Oh, brilliant.
And then life moved forward, and it turned out that I had an opportunity to go back into law in service.
Yeah.
Of taking care of indigent folks, taking care of kids in the juvenile justice system and foster kids and things like that. And so I re-upped. And I went back, and my old office was still available. And about 3 days after I sat down in my desk, my buddy came over with the same bag. He had never opened it, his same bag of ties, and he put it back on the desk and says, I've been keeping these for you.
Brilliant. What a great story. Yeah.
So, Life Without a Tie, folks. This is Ray Martin's great book. And go and find it and tell us where we can find out more about you.
Yeah, so Amazon, the book, but I also have a website called lifewithoutatie.com. And that was created because lots of people who were reading the book said, oh, we really want to see photographs, pictures of all these different events and places and stuff like that. So we built a website to house a photographic journal of the stories, so that's another reason for going. And on that Life Without a Tie website, I recorded the introduction to the book. I did as an audio recording, and so that's a free download. So it's about 15-minute listen, and if you download that for free and listen to it, that will tell you if you wanted to read the book or not. Because yeah.
Well, the name of this podcast episode is going to be Life Without a Tie.
Thank you.
So everybody, take a look at that book and download it. And if you like what Ray has to offer, if you shoot over to my website, awiseandhappylife.com, there's also 300 different self-assessment, downloadable self-assessment guides and instructional guides and the like. And Ray, I just want to clear up for a transparency's sake. I
Yeah,
noticed we have the same last name,
we
but
do.
we're not related, right? I'm not plugging you because you're my brother, but you could
No,
be.
it's a delightful coincidence.
I really enjoyed having you on,
Thank
and
you.
thanks for being here, and thank you for your time, and thank you for the work you do, and especially, I think everybody holds in their hearts the elephant.
I do.
Everybody holds the
Yeah,
elephant in their hearts. I
they
don't
do.
know. Maybe it's just because they're big, gentle giants, but
Yeah, they're
thank you
beautiful.
for all of the work that you've done.
Thank you very much, Bill. Thanks.